If you've ever sent your co-founder a Slack message that you immediately wish you could have unsent, or you felt that drop in your stomach whenever they texted you at 6 a.m., or you carried around a conversation for weeks that you just delayed because you knew it wouldn't go well, those are all symptoms. And here's what they cost you. Over time, you end up telling yourself a story about your co-founder that's partially accurate, partially inaccurate, and it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. They live up to your worst expectations, and it's completely fixable. And all you need are these three basic skills that almost no founder is taught. I'm Dr. Matthew Jones, and I help co-founding teams fix exactly that before it costs them their company. Now, the three skills that I'm going to teach you today are the conflict container, feedback norms, and iMessages. Each one of these is exceptionally simple. But simple and easy are two different things. They take real effort and prioritization, especially because when you're busy, the last thing you really want to do is slow down. And yet, what you get back is completely worth it. You get a lot less noise, you get a lot more signal, and a lot more alignment. And so I'm going to give them to you in this order on purpose, because without the container, the two of the other skills are less effective. So let's start first with the conflict container. The thing I want you to remember, if you take nothing else away from this video, is contain your conflict so it doesn't contaminate your execution. A lot of early stage first time founders are struggling with structure because everything feels urgent and important, and their nervous systems are in fight or flight, this kind of overwhelm. And so they're constantly in firefighter mode, just running around, and they're trying to push themselves past their own capacity to this tipping point that actually starts to reduce their performance. And so that shows up in the way that decisions really stall and progress is spread across multiple domains instead of really focused on one. And so then what happens is the conversation that is most important never actually gets resolved. The conflict container is the structure that fixes that. It has three key components: time, location, and purpose. So to start with time is really just the time it's actually scheduled on the calendar, and also the boundaries around how much time you're going to spend, so the duration. The location is where you're going to have this conversation. And in an ideal world, this is somewhere separate from where you typically work. And then the purpose is you need to make sure that you and your co-founder are completely aligned on the type of conversation you're trying to have, right? So let me show you what I mean. Let's say my co-founder, Mike, interrupts me 3 times in an all-hands meeting. And so I, at that point, superficially feel incredibly angry and frustrated. A little bit deeper than that, I might feel a little hurt. Of course, I wouldn't tell him that. And so the thing that I might think to do is just to either send him messages on the side about, like, you're cutting me off, or whatever the case may be. If I were going to use the conflict container method, what I would do instead is this. After the meeting, I would send him a quick message, get on a quick call, depending on what the schedule looks like. And I would say, hey, Mike, listen, I'm having some feelings about the way the all hands meeting went today. I would love it if we could debug and realign. I'm looking at our calendars now. It looks like we both have 30 minutes available Friday at 2 p.m. Is that something you're open to? And so then what I just did is I gave the conflict, so to speak, being my frustrations, a clear and specific time, and I gave it a clear duration, so that half hour on Friday at 2 p.m. I invited him with such a clear use of the word feeling and debug and realign, AKA psychological language. So we're wanting to work on some of these touchy-feely reactions. Mike now knows that. And so he knows going into that call what it's about and what we're hoping to achieve. And that is a fantastic way for it to then not disrupt the next few meetings. Because if, on the other hand, you were blasting him on the side with Slack or text messages, expressing your frustration, or you kind of had this blow up in front of the team, those all have many negative secondary effects that bleed into the next meeting and the next decision, which then stall. And so we're trying to eliminate that. The other failure mode, though, is when teams don't respect these types of boundaries. So for example, if we say it's Friday at 2 p.m. and it's a half hour, we're not stretching that into 3 hours. Because I had a team once and they said, Matt, it's kind of like eating a pint of Ben and Jerry's. Like, in the moment, it feels really, really good. And you're just, I love fish food as an example of this. And you just want to eat it. And then you feel sick after. And that's exactly what these draining multiple hour-long conversations do, is there something that feels like emotionally we're so close to alignment, if we're almost there. And so one or both of you have this sense of urgency and also some unconscious anxiety about not resolving the argument. And so then you go into these multiple draining conversations that have all these ebbs and flows. And what that does is it derails productivity and it makes it less effective of a conversation because it's not focused and it can just meander all over the place. Even though it feels good in the moment, the long-term implications are not healthy. So what I really want you to do is focus on keeping the container, the its structure intact. It's incredibly important. And so it's probably not the best time to negotiate like a term sheet whenever you're on 2 hours of sleep because you were up all night replaying an argument with your co-founder. That's very unsettling. What works a lot better is then respecting those boundaries. And so I really encourage you to stop, to pause, calm back down, and reschedule a meeting. If you want to use a sales term, book a meeting from a meeting. It's like going to the gym. So like if you try to go to the gym and do a full body exercise for the first time in a very long time, you're going to feel maybe good in the moment, and you're going to feel like, oh, I'm really doing some good work. And then you're going to be so sore that you're going to skip the next 3 weeks, right? That is not effective. That's not helpful. What we want instead is go to the gym for a half hour, go in, do your workout, come out, do it again tomorrow, right? That allows you to build consistency and build this kind of muscle. And that's what your co-founder relationship needs to be able to process conflicts more effectively. And so what I want you to remember is that where and when you have a hard conversation completely changes whether or not your co-founder can actually hear it. So feedback that you bring into the middle of an operational meeting, if you're talking about strategy or whatever the case may be, it derails it, right? Because the cognitive load in that moment, the cost of switching is enormous. Whereas if you take that exact same feedback, you copy and you paste it into a different container, it's going to be heard and internalized, even if the wording is not perfect. And so that's really what I want you to keep in mind. That's why this containment method is so important. But then how do you give the feedback? So that leads us to two, which are feedback norms. So most founding teams are unconscious about how they give feedback. It's not deliberate, meaning most teams give feedback the way that they've learned it elsewhere. So it's shaped by osmosis, by whatever culture you were previously a part of. So there's some founders from a more corporate background who are, often a little bit more seasoned, and they are overly rigid about it because they just copy and paste the best practices. And sometimes that can feel a little bit robotic or like a defense against vulnerability. And so that can sometimes not land, especially if it's like a younger founder on the receiving end. And the other end of the spectrum are founders who really don't feel like they have time, energy, bandwidth, uh, to have these types of conversations, and or just feel like they don't like touchy-feely stuff. They don't think that there's any room for that in business, as if, emotion is separate from cognition and business is separate from humanity. Now, I obviously disagree with that, but all of that to say, the real problem is not what those norms are, it's the mismatch between the two of them. So if one co-founder, as is often the case, prefers really direct feedback, and the other wants it to be less frequent and less direct, a little bit more tactful. Uh, and or there's one co-founder who's just less comfortable giving feedback or feels more personally attacked when receiving it. That creates asymmetry, and that asymmetry and that friction is what makes things far less effective. And so in emotion focused couples therapy, this is kind of like the equivalent of like avoid avoid. Sometimes what I see, I guess, let me make this more explicit. When you do not have clear agreements on how to give and receive feedback, you are more likely to repeat dysfunctional emotional patterns. Those dysfunctional emotional patterns are based on attachment theory. And attachment theory, let's look through the lens of emotion-focused couples therapy, breaks down like this. You can have a pursue and withdraw dynamic, a pursue and pursue with a dynamic, or withdraw and withdraw dynamic. When feedback is unclear, what I most often see are one of the two being pursue, withdraw, or withdraw, withdraw. Pursue, withdraw is one person is very critical of the other, giving a lot of feedback, and then the other person's just shutting down, and it's not bi-directional, and so it's problematic. The other end of the problem is the withdraw, withdraw, where both of you are kind of walking on eggshells, internalizing your frustration, compounding the emotional debt that's leading to resentment between the two of you, calcifying the story that you have about one another, and you're living in these parallel realities because there's no healthy conflict, there's no healthy feedback that helps you bridge the gaps in your perception. And so all that to say, I really, really encourage you to make your feedback norms more explicit, because when those are co-created, there's more opportunity for growth and flow of information. And so here's the things that I would want you to agree on. How often does feedback happen? Is it spoken or written? Uh, Do you have to respond immediately or can you take some time to process? Do you have to have action items out of it or do you not? Is it bi-directional? It's like you need to just be able to articulate all these different dynamics and ideally just write it down in like a co-founder agreement so that you're on the same page about what that looks like from day one, because that will help your relationship scale. Uh, but with all that said, even if you have those good feedback norms in place, there is another moment to moment trap that many founders fall into that makes it really hard to hear anything that was just said. Which brings us to iMessages, number three. iMessages are one of those things that, a lot of people think about it as elementary school, primary school, like it's very, very simple, but it's not easy to execute uh, because a lot of founders will just put, I feel, and then whatever comes after that is fair game, and that's absolutely not true. If what you say after the word feel is not an emotion, you're not doing it right. So if you say I feel that or I feel you, none of that is good. So what I want you to, and especially if you're just leaning into I think, again, these are not iMessages. The intent of the iMessage is to be really clear in communication and keeping this separation between the two of you. And so what I want you to do is to think, I feel X when you Y and I need Z, because that's the actual formula that's going to be far more effective. And so the real work is to slow down and anchor into that structure. Let me give you an example. So when you go back to Mike, the guy, my co-founder who interrupted me the three times in the all hands meeting, uh, if I were not using that conflict container method, I might say something like, Mike, like you're being such an asshole. You just don't care what I have to say and you're cutting me off multiple times. Like, what's up, dude? That might elicit some frustration for Mike because now he has to defend his reality to me. He has to say, "Oh, Matt, like, no, I do respect you. I do care what you have to say." Like, and now you're calling me an asshole. So now I'm kind of frustrated, right? You can see how this dysfunction just really starts to escalate. Whereas what might be more effective would be for me to say something like, "Hey, Mike, when you interrupted me those three times in the all hands meeting, so clear, shared, observable reality, when you interrupted me those three times in the all hands meeting, I felt really frustrated because I really value having this aligned front whenever we're in front of the team, and I really want to make sure that we look completely aligned in all hands meetings or in other instances like this, so that the team perceives us as really cohesive and connected." And now all of a sudden, Mike can hear me, right? Because there was a shared observable reality. You can't really dispute that. I anchored in my feeling, which now he heard, and he heard what I really valued. And so I could say, if I wanted to make it a request, I could say something like, "Hey, Mike, when you interrupted me those three times, I felt frustrated and a little bit hurt because I really value alignment. Would you be open to us syncing 5 minutes before the next all hands just to make sure that we're on the same page?" Right now, all of a sudden, it's completely digestible. It's not dysfunctional. And Mike can hear that. He can internalize it and he can be like, "Oh, yeah, like I want the same thing." So 100%, let's modify the structure or process to make sure that that happens. As I think about these three different skills and some of this space around co-founder coaching, leadership dynamics, I do think that we overemphasize communication tactics, like the exact words, when in fact it's the environment around the conversation that has even more influence. So setting aside this time and space for a real meaningful conversation about the relationship, right? Instead of just everything else around it, is what keeps the relationship from becoming one of the things that caps how fast your company can grow. So if you do this from day one, this meta communication, this talking to one another, using some of these skills that I've just articulated, it's going to set you up for far more success. I've seen a lot of teams who are able to integrate this, where now all of a sudden, it could be like a Tuesday afternoon and they can get into a heated disagreement about the roadmap. And then Wednesday, they're completely aligned and they're back to functioning because they've not only learned to disagree and commit, but they've learned how to continue evolving as leaders, as individuals, and in their relationship, such that any sort of threat, any sort of disagreement doesn't threaten or damage their foundation. They have a solid foundation of trust and safety that allows them to disagree and then make decisions, by the way, that are even more effective and insightful because it's decisions that neither one of them could have made alone. That's the true unlock and the true synergistic effect of a healthy and flexible co-founder relationship. So with all that being said, your co-founder relationship is way too important to leave to chance. So please subscribe and grab the co-founder effect below, and I'll show you exactly what to do with it.